Race and the War on Drugs, brought to you by the people listed on this screen. Drugs are a part of our society. For the most part, drugs are a good thing. If we have a headache, we'll take a drug. If we get diagnosed with a virus, the doctor will prescribe us a drug so we can get better. It's when drugs are abused or used purely to alter our perception of reality that drugs become bad. More specifically, it is what happens when people who are abusing drugs and the problems that arise from that abuse that makes drugs bad. Those problems sometimes have severe life-ending consequences. And it are those consequences that have led to the creation of laws to protect the general population from the ramifications of the few who abuse. It is those that abuse drugs that have led Mr. Garrison to say, drugs are bad, okay? Not only is the abuse of drugs bad, but those that promote the abuse of drugs is a problem. In 2015, nearly 1.5 million arrests were made in relation to drugs, and that's here in the United States of America. Slightly over 16% of those arrests were for the sale and manufacture of drugs. Almost 84% of those arrests were for possession. Now, there are stiff penalties for drug possession, and even more so for the sale and manufacture of drugs. When a family is impacted by drugs in this way, it is life-ending. And I say it is life-ending because of the negative impact that it has on that family. When we see that there are 1.5 million arrests, that's a crazy high number. However, it is minute when compared to the total population, which is 332 million. There is a problem with that 1.5 million arrests, however. When you drill down into the numbers, percentages that you first find show that more whites are arrested than blacks. For instance, in 2007, 64% of the arrests were for whites, and 35% were for blacks, and 1% for other. But there are more whites than blacks in the United States. So when we look at the number of arrests per 100,000 individuals, the numbers flip. In 2007, there were 1,721 blacks arrested for drugs per each 100,000 individuals. That same year only saw 476 whites arrested for drugs per 100,000 residents. That is to say that in 2007, blacks were arrested 4 times more often than whites were for drug-related instances. Does this mean that the justice system is impartial? Or is it set that way on purpose? In 1971, President Nixon declared war on drugs. Drugs, that being illegal drugs, are bad, so a war on them seems ideal. If we can stop people from making a choice that we don't agree with and punish them if they still choose to do it, we can protect ourselves. So the war on drugs has been going on for over 40 years now. Every year, Congress sets aside money to continue this war. But it's not the first time that anti-drug laws have been enacted. In the 1870s, anti-opium laws were enacted to protect the whites of California from Chinese immigrants and their opium dens. In the 1900s, there were anti-cocaine laws enacted, and in 1910 to the 1920s, there were anti-marijuana laws. All of these laws sought to protect a white population from the lower classes, that being minorities, Chinese, blacks, Latinos, and their drug use from whites. The war on drugs is a good thing. Dr. David F. Musto, a psychologist and historian, researched and wrote a book about the U.S. and its history of drug use, abuse, and control policy. Drugs destroy the body and a person's personality, thus the goodness of the drug war. On the other side, Dr. Musto also acknowledges that opponents of illegal drugs, to include government policymakers, have exaggerated the dangers of drugs. This exaggeration is often linked with racial hostility. Keith O. Lawrence, a teacher and author, wrote about race, crime, and punishment. In it, he points out that drug control is the new Jim Crow. Drug control enables minority populations to be victimized. All the numbers and statistics published by government agencies on arrests show that there is racial inequality. This racial inequality is the connection to old Jim Crow laws. Approximately 12 to 13% of the American population is African American, but they make up 35% of jail inmates and 37% of prison inmates of the total male inmate population in 2014. Where are we currently on the war on drugs? Most of the recent presidents have pointed to doing something about inequality in drug enforcement, but little has been done to make it so. In 2010, President Obama and his administration released the National Drug Control Strategy. Every year it changes what it focuses on. In 2015, it focused on 7 areas. 1. Preventing drug use in our communities. 2. Seeking early intervention opportunities in healthcare. 3. Integrating treatment for substance use disorders into healthcare and supporting recovery. 4. Breaking the cycle of drug use, crime, and incarceration. 5. Disrupting domestic drug trafficking and production. 6. Strengthening international partnerships. And 7. Improving information systems to better address drug use and its consequences. President Obama's nod to inequality is found in number 4, breaking the cycle of drug use, crime, and incarceration. Outside of the federal government, state government is tackling drug enforcement inequality. This can be seen by the states that are enacting laws to decriminalize or legalizing marijuana use. Drugs have a significant impact on society. Crime, poverty, and abuse are just a few of the problems. One of the greatest is generational poverty. A parent who needs to make money to pay for a need, especially one who lives in an impoverished area, may choose poorly and end up a statistic in the war on drugs. The imprisonment that follows negatively impacts that family. Drugs have a significant impact on the healthcare industry. 23.5 million Americans need treatment at a cost of about $67 billion a year. Human psychologist Thomas Szasz points to the fact that the war on drugs is a metaphorical war of a type of people against another type of people. The war on drugs is the longest, most protracted formally declared war of this turbulent century. It is longer than both World War I and World War II combined. Politicians, according to Szasz, are the ones who are actually waging this war. A solution to end this is to find a peaceable end to this war. Everyone working together will make this possible. A suggestion of improvement is to increase parental involvement in a child's early social life.
Increasing the involvement with a child and the child's peers can set the stage for future success when it comes to making positive choices. This is to combat poor choices often made by children who grow up in neighborhoods with high crime rates.
Another suggestion to improve drug enforcement and equality is to make the laws equal. Currently, if you get pulled over and have 28 grams of cocaine, you are charged with a possession misdemeanor, which can net you a fine and or some jail time. Now, if you get pulled over and have 28 grams of crack cocaine, you are charged with a felony possession and will do 5 years in prison. Now, the only difference between cocaine and crack cocaine is some water and baking soda. To instill equality, a person who has 28 grams of either should suffer the same consequences. In conclusion, is it right to refer to it as a war on drugs? Or should we call it a war on race? This war has more than two sides, as many wars do. But what side is right? Although this war may have had some success in curtailing illegal substance abuse, is it worth the cost of equality? That equality is the bedrock of our country, for all men are created equal. The United States Constitution points towards equality, and the war on drugs, when looking at numbers, is anything but equal.